All right, next up is Justin Meyer. Justin is the CEO of Bitovi, which he co-founded in 2008 with his college buddy, Brian Moschel. Since then, he's been obsessed with perfecting application design, development, and delivery. He lives in Chicago with his wife and kids, and he told me to mention his hobbies like running, playing guitar, and reading history books, just to make him seem a little bit more human. But between you and me, none of us should be fooled. All right, Justin, floor is yours. Take it away.
All right. Okay, I see some thumbs ups. All right. So, hey, everybody, I'm Justin. Are you tired of projects that don't deliver on time and meet expectations? Have you found yourself building the wrong thing or something wrongly? This presentation gives a straightforward process to breaking down work into stories that are designed to incrementally avoid risk and maximize customer value. In other words, we'll really be creating agile plans that focus on working software and enables responding to change. That just happens to be two of the four values of the Agile Manifesto. So working software over comprehensive documentation and responding to change over following a plan. We are making a plan in this, but it is going to be plans that you can respond to change. And the reason why you want to make these agile plans is because they help you get done faster, right? So agile plans, you work in little tiny increments that you can bring back to customers, or they're exposing risk so that you can change direction and get where you're going much more quickly. Rigid plans, in contrast, they tend to take a much longer time to ultimately get where you need to be. So what we're going to do is pretend we got handed a mock-up, and we're going to break that down into user stories, which I'm calling shell stories. They're not full user stories. They're just kind of a quick snapshot of what's in and out of scope and the subtasks, the high-level subtasks that you would take to your engineering team and kind of say like, hey, here's what I think we all need to do to complete this. In order to do this work, in order to break down the work, we have to follow this pattern. First, we're going to go through the functionality and identify the high-level goals and things that a user needs to be able to do. We don't need to go through and identify every single little thing inside the mockups that a user might look at or might do, but just what's the broad functionality a user needs to be able to accomplish. Then you prioritize that broad functionality. You select the highest priority piece of that functionality, and then you start breaking that down by figuring out what you want to do immediately, what's in and out of scope of that first story, identify the subtasks for that story, then you're going to take everything that you postponed and put it into your list, and then we're going to repeat this process. So I'm going to go through all of this with examples, but then once you're through this process and you've got your pitch for your plan, you review it with your team, and then you might go put it into project management software like Jira. So I've got this little dashboard I set up here so we can work through building these shell stories. I'm going to put the step that we're on, the mockup that we're going to be looking at, and our shell stories here on the right. I use this notation to build out the shell stories. So I'll give the name of the shell story, what I think should be included in that shell story, what should be excluded in that shell story, and then I'll eventually define the subtasks as nested bulleted lists. And if one subtask depends on another, I will indent it like this. If this doesn't make perfect sense right now, don't worry about it. It'll make more sense in a moment. So let's go through our wireframes and see what is the broad high-level functionality. I'm going to be using this application that we use internally at Bitovi. It's to help us manage our staffing. And we're going to be doing just one small slice, which is the team members functionality, which essentially lets us manage the team members at Bitovi and what are their skill sets. Now here we can see we need to be able to list team members. So I'm going to add that as a potential shell story on the right. And if we keep walking through our mockups, we'll see, oh, there's also the ability to edit team members, and delete team members and add team members. Okay, so this is really, it's basically CRUD. You want to CRUD your team members, and that's the high level functionality. So now that I've got the broad functionality, I take a step back and prioritize it. So which of these things are the most important to do? Now, I could do a whole other like hour-long talk on different ways to prioritize. I'm just going to kind of share my gut instinct on this, and we can leave like the systems for prioritization till some other day. Here, I think you definitely want to show something to, if you're trying to prioritize to maximize customer value, you want to at least show a list first, because it doesn't matter if you could add, delete, or edit anything until you can actually see it. So you got to start with list. Make some type of list functionality work. Then generally, at least at Bitovi, we're hiring. So I would do add next. If you have add and delete, you really don't need edit. So I put edit at the bottom. All right, so this is starting to build that kind of initial plan of attack here, of what we build in what order. Now I take the first item from the list, and which is list team members, and I'm going to figure out what's in and out of the list team members initial story. So I look at my mockups, and I just kind of write. I see things and I write pluses or minuses, whether I think we should do it immediately or it can be done later. And for this presentation, I'm being about as extreme as you could possibly be. So I want to cut out almost everything and do it for later, which generally speaking, whatever you can do later, do it. So in this case, I'll say, hey, let's avoid styling. Let's avoid the breadcrumbs. Let's not make this add team member button. Let's not worry about roles. Let's not worry about these actions. What we're just going to do is make a page that says team members and lists this basic employee name, start date, end date, and that's it. Because even this would be useful, because at least at Bitovi, we celebrate when like people, their year anniversaries. We would have a list of everybody in their and when they started at Bitovi, which would be valuable, even if that list was just maintained in the database. So the next thing I do, I haven't finished because this is just one screenshot. I have to look for any other list functionality that might be provided in the mockups. So there's also a loading screen and an empty team members page because you might not have put in any team members. I'm going to ignore both of those things and just say, we're going to worry about that later. We're not going to worry about showing some loading screen and we're going to try to start with team members essentially seeded in the database. So now I need to identify the subtasks. Your subtasks tend to be you look at your pluses, the things that you're actually going to do. And then I start breaking those down into things that I'm pretty sure a developer is going to have to do to accomplish these things. I'm not going to break it down into like literal code, but I'm going to break it down into the kind of macroscopic architectural pieces that front end, back end, maybe DevOps has to accomplish in order to do all of this. So to get a page title, I'm not going to there's not much to break down in there, but to list basic employee data, there's quite a bit that you have to do. So that needs to be able to pull data from some service layers. So we're going to need a service to get employees, but we want it to have data. So we're going to need to be able to create some C data. But in order to even create some C data, we're going to have a database. So I'll outline those things because at least in my experience, there's even with just full stack engineers, there's a lot to think about to make all of these things work if you're starting a project from scratch. So now that I have kind of a rough idea of like this first story and what it's going to take to accomplish, I will move out all the things we're doing later into this list in a priority order. So I'm probably going to do roles next because especially if we're going to do adding a team member, it's nice if the roles, I know that there's going to have to be some kind of join table there and relationship between roles and employees. Good to do that right away. That also adds value to be able to see who does what, who has what skill at Bitovi. So I would do roles. And then some of this other stuff, like adding a team member button, can be part of future stories. And then, maybe I'll do the styling at the end. Again, I'm going to do a rough draft of this. This would not be permanent until I reviewed it with the engineering team. So now that I've done team members, I can move on to roles. Same process again. I'm going to figure out what's in and out of scope for adding roles to this team members list. I don't want to do the colors because that's going to make things complex, and there's going to be fights over who gets the coolest color, which is Bitovi red right now for sure. So I want to avoid those conversations. So we're going to not do colors, and we're going to just need to make sure that we can update the table with roles. But now we need to identify the subtask. And again, roles are going to have to be part of the service layer because we're going to have to get that data, and we're going to have to seed roles and seed the roles and the relationships between roles and people. All right, got my subtask. Time to reprioritize. Role colors. That can be done at the very end. So I'm just going to stick that at the end. Okay, now we're going to break down the next. We're going to repeat with the highest priority. This will be the last one we do because I think you'll understand the process after seeing it 3 times. And we're going to do add team member. So add team member, this modal shows up after you click add team member. And then you can click add and close, and that saves, creates the team member and shows them in the list. But but in order to refine what's in and out of scope, there's so much functionality that the UX team provided here, which is like little things like, okay, once you enter data, then add and close becomes active. If you forget full name, there's validation. Once you've put in information and you click add and close, there's a little spinner that shows while that request is out. You could handle server errors. And then not only does the new team member show up in the list, there's a little toast message that is shown to pop up when the person has successfully been added. There's so much richness here. I want to avoid as much of it as possible. I kind of put things that I want to include again and what things I don't. No toast message, no adding team member. I don't even know if I want to, if developers implement the modal cancel and hide and stuff like that, fine. But a user can just refresh if they have a problem. They do want it to go away. And I just want to get the basics to uncover as much risk as possible. I would typically, instead of doing a client validation, I do think you want server-side validation as early as possible. So some limited server-side error handling I would include right away because we want to make sure our data has integrity. But go through this list and take, again, my first stab at what I think should and shouldn't be included. Then I identify the subtasks by figuring out what the pluses were and kind of breaking them down. There's some things like, hey, just to create this team member form, we're going to need a roles service. We're going to need to be able to pull all the roles so we can present them here. And then I keep repeating this process, take the out of scope items, put them at the bottom of the list in the priority order. Those modals, forcing users to refresh is kind of weird. So I'd probably want to fix that right away. But I'd probably still do add team member, do delete next, and come back to these things kind of at the end. And then I repeat with delete. But as I've said, I think you all get the idea now. You just keep doing this process to eventually fully flesh out your plan. And again, that plan is go through your broad functionality, prioritize it, then start with that first high priority item, figure out what you can cut from it, what's in and out of scope, figure out the subtasks, move those out of scope things to the bottom of the list priority order, and just repeat until you're done. And then once you're done, review all of this work with your team, make sure, and probably who's ever on like, making product decisions, make sure this aligns with them and engineering, then put this in your PM software and start developing. Finally, I don't know if this as a quote I made up, but I didn't know how to just put it in the page or put it in a presentation. But it's really the shortest path to success does often mean you need to check where you are and where you're headed. Of course, if you're omniscient, you don't need to do this. And often I will want I'll encourage development teams to check where they are. And sometimes I feel bad because it's like they check where they are and like, yeah, no, we did it this way. Everything worked as expected. Duh. And why couldn't we have just been developing, getting all of the features in, because it's a little bit easier on the developers, obviously, if you're like in one area to finish things off. So sometimes it can feel wasteful, but those times where like you don't check and you wish you had are much, much, much more costly than all those little checks. So in my opinion, it's almost always worth the risk for that early error detection. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Hopefully you can use this, even if you're not a project manager, even if you're a developer, to use this strategy to plan out your work and finish projects faster and deliver more. So thank you.
There's a good one. In your opinion, do project managers need to have dev?
I at least for Bitovi, I think it is. I'd like Bitovi project managers, TPOs, to have the ability to understand like the high-level architectural components of the apps that we build. You don't need to understand like how to write React state management, but if you understand that this component is going to make requests for data, and that there's a server there that's going to have to connect to a database, I think the project managers, the best project managers, can sit in between business, design, and engineering and coordinate all of that extremely effectively. And the more you can understand what's going on with the engineers, I love being able to like get ahead of engineers, say, hey, here's a plan. We don't need to like have a million thoughts coming in the meeting around what the plan should be. I can give a rough draft of the plan, and then we can just kind of move things around to make the plan better. And that can sometimes take those like 5 hours of meetings and condense it to like one 45-minute meeting where we just like, oh no, let's do this a little bit later. Let's do this a little bit earlier. All right, we're on board. Let's go. It's a huge time saver, I think, if project managers have a decent insight into the architecture of how these things are built.